chance to grill us on those. A little bit of the latest news. James Bradberry officially released from the New York Giants. Where does he fit in now? Where's a landing spot for him as a free agent? And Tom Brady inking a massive broadcasting deal for the end of his career, which is most likely going to be after his final season this year in 2022 with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. We'll get into all of it and your questions right now.
You're listening to the Peacock and Williamson NFL Show, your daily podcast on the National Football League, powered by the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Welcome to Peacock and Williamson Tuesday Live, a.k.a. Twitter Tuesday, as it was previously known. We got some Twitter questions as well as those that pop up in the chat. Brian Peacock and Matt Williamson at BD Peacock at Williamson NFL are those handles on Twitter. Appreciate you making us your first listen every day here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day is what we do, and your team is covered after you're done listening to us cover the entire league here on Peacock and Williamson every day. Go check out your team, which is covered on the Locked On Podcast Network. Shout out to everybody already starting to jump in on the stream. Appreciate all of you, and feel free to hit us with those questions or comments or whatever comes to your mind as we go through today's episode. But let's start it off with the breaking news from today, Matt, and it is Tom Brady. He is, let's see, I want to get the numbers correct because they're large numbers. And the broadcasters these days are getting paid as much as the players in a lot of cases. He's not quite going to get top of the market quarterback money, but he's going to get that top of the market wide receiver money as a broadcaster. And according to Front Office Sports, Tom Brady will step into the richest pact in sports media history once he retires from the NFL. Brady will earn $20 million to $25 million a year as the number one analyst on Fox. Brady will surpass both Troy Aikman, who moved to ESPN, and Tony Romo of CBS with what he's being paid. And I assume those two guys will now have a benchmark for what they're going to ask for on their next contracts. But Aikman just left, so he's already used his leverage to get himself a new contract. But what do you think? Tom Brady, the broadcaster, will he be the GOAT there as well?
Really interesting. I mean, more Brady, I think, is better. And at this stage of his life, he's starting to come out with things and pull back the curtain a little bit and, show people what he does behind the scenes and more of his family stuff. And I was actually just talking to my sister, who's not much of a sports fan. She was all over the TB12 series, I think it was called. And I'm excited to dig into that at some point. So he's obviously a very interesting dude with an unbelievable wealth of football knowledge as well. I assume, not that he'll tell us everything, but I assume he'll take the Romo approach to even a higher level of, this safety's coming, look for the slant behind it, the quarterback didn't see it, and, the play was there. Really break it down as he would process, and there's never been a better processor in the league. I don't know anything about the finances. I mean, I guess if any player turned analyst is worth that much money, it's absolutely him. Peyton Manning would be high on my list as well because I think he's funny and extremely knowledgeable. Mm-hmm. But does anyone, I mean, maybe some people do, and I'm just in the minority because I'm going to watch no matter what. Does anyone tune in because Brady's going to be the announcer? You know what I mean?
That's where I go with this. I feel like it's wasting money by some of these networks. And to be honest with you, most people are tired of these highly paid broadcasters and looking for alternate ways to hear alternate voices. That's what makes the Manning cast so refreshing because it's not standard broadcasters. And I agree with you. I would, if I was to choose based on broadcasters, which game I was going to watch, and we don't get Madden Summerall anymore, which would have been number one. We talked a little bit about that off the air, and that's the last time I really cared who was broadcasting a game all that much. I would choose Manning.
I was also 10.
Right, exactly. A young man, a young kid mostly. And if I was to choose, I would choose Manning over Brady. There's a, I don't know if Brady has the greatest charisma, and obviously there's a ton of knowledge there. But I mean, I'm not going to be tuning in to any games because Brady is broadcasting it, and I don't tune in because Troy Aikman is broadcasting, and I don't tune in for Joe Buck. I don't tune in for Tony Romo. So I don't know why they're paying all this money. I guess you got to pay him a lot to just get him to do the job, period. Maybe that's part of it. But I think there might be some, because look, this is the way I've always thought of things in the NFL, especially because it's, look, coaches coach, scouts scout, players play, broadcasters broadcast. Just because you're good at one doesn't mean you're good at the other. We've seen really good coaches screw up the roster building process, right?
Yeah.
We've seen really good players not be good broadcasters. The all-time leading rusher in the NFL was the worst broadcaster of all time, right? It's so that's what you're not always great at both, and some people are great at both, but just because you're good at one doesn't mean you're good at the other. And we get a lot of pushback all the time. You talk about the draft. Oh, what do you know? You're not a GM or a coach. What do you know about the draft? It's like, have you followed how bad coaches and GMs are at actually drafting? So anyway, I do think that sometimes people can go out of their lanes, and just because he's famous and it was a really good player, and clearly he's married to the game because he's already got a deal for what he's going to do after his career with football, and it involves football. I don't expect a lot from Brady to be this amazing, greatest of all time broadcast.
I think I'll learn something from him every broadcast in terms of X's and O's and blitz packages and protections and all the, nerdy stuff like that. But I'm with you. I mean, there isn't necessarily a direct overlap between any of those skill sets, coach to broadcaster, player to scout, whatever, all those things you mentioned. And, a lot of coaches that were phenomenal players drastically failed. I guess Ted Williams gave it a shot. And they're like, what do you mean you can't pick up a curveball? You can't see the seams? No, Ted, I can't see the seams of the ball. Like some people just have ungodly gifts. That doesn't apply to Brady. So, I mean, hopefully he can translate his knowledge to the fans. But isn't he rumored to basically be the successor, or in some way, shape, or form have some ownership in the Dolphins going forward, or looking to do that? I don't know if you know much about that, but I guess the owner to be, whenever that comes, is like Brady's best friend. So this might be, he may end up monopolizing this league when it's all said and done, with Super Bowl trophies and ownership and all the above.
The TB12 FL is what the NFL is going to become. Yeah, I don't know. We'll see. Do you have any thoughts on James Bradberry, his official release now? And we kind of knew it was coming. They tried to trade him. They were unsuccessful. Was he overrated as a player when he signed that big contract with the New York Giants from the Carolina Panthers as a free agent? Because he's not going to see the end of that contract. He's going to get released. According to Dan Duggan of The Athletic, it looks like the New York Giants, with this release, are going to save $10.1 million in cap savings, leaving behind $11.7 million in dead money, unless they make it a post June 1st designation, in which there would be $11.5 million savings, with $10.4 million dead this year and $1.4 dead next year. So they would push $1.4 million into next year's dead money instead of this year's dead money, essentially. So it's pretty similar in the structures of those numbers as far as cap savings for the New York Giants. But clearly, Joe Shane comes in as the new GM for the New York Giants, and some pretty big names. A first rounder from last year, Kadarius Toney, was on the block. Now they have released after trying to trade James Bradberry. So is this year one for the Giants? And we'll talk about landing spots potentially, but is year one for the Giants more about cleaning house than it is about trying to build something for now? Because they have a lame duck quarterback now that they didn't pick up a fifth-year option for in Daniel Jones, and they didn't really do anything for the post-Daniel Jones quarterback room.
I think that's exactly what it is. And I don't know that Bradberry was a terrible contract or an overrated player for the Buck. Maybe a little. He's not, to me, a top 5 corner, but he's a really good player, and I expect him to get picked up very, very quickly. I think that project number one for the Giants is just erasing the mistakes of the prior regime. Guys like Kenny Golladay are bad contracts, and I just went over the cap.com to see where they're at, in terms of cap space. They now have, a little bit this year, $14.5 million, give or take. So have to sign their draft picks. Maybe they can get a bargain free agent. Now's a good time to go shopping for those type of things. But next year, only the Bears and Texans have more cap space as it sits right now than New York, who had very little spending power this offseason. So there's 4 teams with over $80 million available, and the Giants are one of them. So I think they're preparing for that day. But, even just looking at like their offensive skill position players, besides Tony, who might be going out the door at some point. Who knows? And the receiver Robinson and the tight end that they drafted this year, all the rest of that group could possibly be gone next year. I mean, Shepard, Galladay, Barkley. I think Rudolph's already gone, or I'm not positive on that, but even spots that look like we're deep for this team could be really shuffling. Oh, Jones, of course, was the other one I wanted to mention, as you mentioned as well. So they might be in the market for like an all new group of skill position players. But I think it's really just, let's clean out the mess that, it's like you move into a house and the basement's a disaster. Like, didn't anybody clean this stuff up? I got to clean this stuff up before I paint it and make it nice.
Yeah, you don't paint first. You clean it first, then you paint it.
Right.
Put some new hardwood floors in there or something. Let's talk a little bit about a couple of landing spots, and I'll throw the New England Patriots out there as a landing spot potentially. Yeah. They've got, Malcolm Butler is back there. Jalen Mills. They lost their best cornerback. They did draft a 3rd and 4th round corner, but Marcus Jones is more of the nickel variety. So an outside corner for a team that runs a lot of man coverage, that could be a landing spot. I look at the maybe the Seattle Seahawks. They did draft a couple of corners, but more of the draft and develop variety there. So would Bradberry be an upgrade over Sidney Jones? And I think that's entirely possible.
Yeah.
And
maybe the Jets.
I could see the Jets. They did get Sauce.
You're right.
So,
aggressive front office.
The Rams are kind of involved in everybody that's a big name player, and they didn't have any draft picks to tackle that, but they already did bring back Troy Hill. So I don't know if he's the spot, but yeah, as the Newt says in the chat, yeah, I could see him definitely. Can always see the big name free agents going to LA. Maybe Kansas City too is another one I'll throw out there.
Yeah, that's not a bad one either. Since I'm at overthecap.com, I just pulled up who's got a lot of cap space remaining. The Panthers have the most. I don't know if that would be a fit again. The Browns still have a lot, and that's with Mayfield on the docket. Would they be interested? Possibly. I don't think the Texans would be somewhere that he would want to go. Miami seems loaded at corner. The Saints are probably good enough at corner. Since he drafted defensive backs like crazy, the Chargers brought in a high-priced corner already. The Bears drafted secondary. But the one that comes to mind, just looking at cap space, is the Cowboys. I mean, they still have $15.5 million. They're an aggressive front office. Put him opposite Diggs, possibly. I mean, I'm spitballing here, to be honest with you. But, they don't sit on their hands.
Corners are needed around the NFL. It is an important position. Looking at the PFF grades, really only one good season according to Pro Football Focus's.
I can see that,
and that was in 2020, where he had a 79.8, and it wasn't an elite season, but it was 7th among 121 corners in the league. Last year, he was dead middle of the pack of 116 cornerbacks that qualified to be graded by PFF. James Bradberry was 58th, so right in the middle, 62.8 grade, which is not great, and that's kind of close to what he had throughout the rest of his career, except for the one good year, according to PFF. That is so. I'm
not giving PFF a hard time,
right?
But I do one thing I credit them for. They say the cornerback position is pretty inconsistent year to year, except for the elite ones. That there's a lot of up and down with their grades, with the good to great, good to really good ones. And I'm sitting there thinking, well, the Giants also didn't have a great pass rush last year either. They go out and draft pass rush. I don't know how Pro Football Focus factors that in. I mean, if you're covering a half a second longer, sure makes it tough. I think he's a real good player that won't be unemployed long. But I'm not disagreeing with what Pro Football Focus said, that there was one outlier year, and you can't pay for that.
All right, we'll get into the chat a little bit. We've got some Twitter questions as well coming up on this live episode of Peacock and Williamson, but I'll let the folks out there know about BetOnline. Continues to be the number one source for all your betting needs and sports information. And I want to clear something up that I said yesterday when we were talking about the NFC West draft grades. And by the way, feel free to roast us on our NFC grades. We'll get into the AFC grades starting tomorrow with the East. I said that there wasn't much in the NFC West as far as players you could bet on for offensive or defensive rookie of the year, because the Seattle Seahawks, the only team that had a first-round pick in that division, and they went with Cross. But I totally forgot about Ken Walker in the second round. That's actually one I really like. I think they would maybe out of him. And he's one of and maybe the best pure running back in this draft class. And I could see him absolutely ending up at the front of the line with some of the injuries going on in that backfield. So maybe that's where you should put your money at BetOnline for Offensive Rookie of the Year, the second-round running back out of Seattle, Kenneth Walker. Find all the latest odds, news, sports developments, including this year's NBA playoffs, Major League Baseball, NFL futures, Super Bowl champion, fights, and live betting, esports, and more, you name it. So get over to the BetOnline website today or use your mobile device to learn more about the trends and action at BetOnline, where the game starts. Thanks again, everybody, for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen. Make sure for your second listen, you're checking out Matt's Locked On Dynasty podcast. I'm doing Locked On 49ers. If you're not a 49ers fan, that is okay. Your team is covered right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Are the New York Giants a dark horse, Matt, for Baker Mayfield during this rebuild? And I've heard some whispers that maybe Jimmy Garoppolo, under the same circumstances, that clearly they don't believe enough in Daniel Jones. And what's funny is players like Baker Mayfield are maybe why the Giants were more shy to pick up that fifth-year option for Daniel Jones. So would they even want to go that route?
I hadn't thought of this. I kind of like it the more I'm thinking about it, especially after the Bradberry release. Just talked about cap space. They could absorb at least a portion of Mayfield's contract. Initially, I thought, well, Daniel Jones is closer to Josh Allen than Mayfield is, but Josh Allen's the freakiest freak quarterback in the league. You know, I mean, like, you're not going to get the Josh Allen clone, especially in the middle of May. You know, I mean, like, those guys are on other teams are going to be first-round picks next year, which brings me to, well, Mayfield and Jones could compete this year. They did strongly go after Mitch Trubisky, so it wasn't like they were just sitting on their hands at the quarterback position and content with what they have. Sign Baker to a 2-year deal, maybe, you know, that let those two fight it out this year. Mayfield will be on the team next year. Certainly doesn't mean you couldn't draft the first-round quarterback too. So, yeah, I think that's a pretty good idea, pretty good landing spot. And maybe that's the next shoe to drop. Good call, Matthew.
And really, it depends on Baker Mayfield's. So teams would have to be willing to take on some money. And would the Giants be willing to do that?
Yeah.
Or is everyone just waiting? You know, Seattle obviously comes to mind. And I'm sure if Baker Mayfield just becomes a free agent, Seattle would probably be the choice over the Giants. It seems like it would be an easier path to play this year. But you don't have to pay him anything. You can pay him the league minimum if he gets cut because he's got that guaranteed contract. And the Cleveland Browns will be the ones paying him if he gets released. So you can pay him the league minimum and he's still getting that $18 million, right? So, I mean, in that scenario, maybe he ends up a Steeler, right? Just to try to stick it to him. So, which is probably very unlikely because there's a tougher path to play there. Mm-hmm. But anyway, that's an interesting one. And I think probably that's why those teams aren't cutting him. Like, you know, so for the 49ers, they don't want to cut Jimmy. They don't want him to end up with the Seahawks, I'm sure.
Right. But that situation's not contentious.
No, it's not. It's different. You know? And the Browns almost have to do something with Baker, but at the same time, cutting him doesn't help them. So they'll wait till the last possible second to try to trade him and at least have a team pick up some of that salary, because if they cut him now, they're still going to be stuck with the entire $18 million, just like if they cut him at the last possible second. So there's no reason for either one of those teams to do anything now, which is why neither one of those players have gotten cut. So these teams that might be interested, it's sort of a little bit of a staring match. And the first team that kind of has that need or decides, look, we'll take on whatever of this, and we're willing to offer something little, I think then we'll start to see some movement with those last two quarterbacks that deserve to be starting somewhere in the NFL.
Yeah, just sticking with Mayfield, I think that a lot of our listeners and viewers, I guess, are going, why isn't there any interest in Mayfield? He's better than some starters out there. And I think that's a little bit of a misnomer. There's not, it's all about the money. It's not, you know, I don't want Baker plus 15 million guaranteed or 10 million guaranteed when I think we have the Browns behind the 8 ball. And like you said, you laid it out great, that if they cut him and I give him $2 million, Baker still makes 20 this year and is happy as can be and doesn't hurt my cap at all. Or, you know, better yet, give him $2 million this year with the option of 20 million the year after if you're the Giants, or 15 or whatever it is. Have some power in that. dangle a carrot to him or incentives or whatever for next year. And then he's very attractive. I mean, if he doesn't cost you a pick or a big chunk of right now salary cap money, and a lot of teams don't have a lot of cap space, then I think people will be beating down his door. I think there'll be 4 or 5 teams that would be interested. Like, I like Davis Mills, but I'd throw Baker Mayfield in that room too and see what happens, and I could say that about a bunch of teams, maybe Miami, whoever.
And I could see why Baker Mayfield would be pretty ticked off right now, because he played through a lot of injuries, and maybe he shouldn't have, because it hurt his. If you go back 1 year when Baker Mayfield's 5th-year option was getting picked up, I mean, that was a no-brainer.
Nobody thought twice about
what's that. We were. It wasn't like, oh, are the Browns going to re-sign him? It was
wasn't
more
like Darnold. Like, I don't know, should they give it to him or not?
Right? Yeah, it was like It was like, not are they going to re-sign him? It was, how much are they going to pay when they do re-sign Baker Mayfield? Like, that was a no-brainer. He was in such a different place going into last year than going and winning a playoff game for the Browns. That's just something that quarterbacks didn't do in Cleveland. So yeah, he did get kind of a raw deal there, and I know there's some personality stuff as well, so teams might not be as interested. But I have a feeling if he was to get cut, he would get snapped up really, really quickly. And I think in cities like Carolina and Seattle, he would win that starting job and probably repair at least somewhat his image and go a long way to making himself some more money in the future.
And making those teams a little more competitive, which maybe that's not what they want deep down, but there's also that issue of it. Real quick on Mayfield, I'm sure we have other things to get to. I'm hard on him because he's not really for me. I think he has some inherent faults to his game, but I also think it's crazy, to your point. If you judge him just off last year's tape, he had like 4,000 injuries. I know you can only judge what happens between the lines, but sometimes you got to use some common sense too and be like, he doesn't look the same.
The Newt can't believe, Matt, that you didn't call me out for being a homer about the 49ers yesterday during our NFC West draft grades. He thinks that the 49ers draft was rough, especially on day 2.
I'll be honest. I mean, I'm glad you listened, Newt, but I mean, I was shocked, BP, that you were as down on that draft as you were. I got a lot of negative vibes from you concerning the Niners draft, more than I expected. I think we both liked the Drake Jackson pick, quite a bit. And then after that, you were kind of wishy-washy on it at best, was my take on it. Maybe I misread you, but I actually cited something you said on one of my other shows, that this Niner infatuation maybe was the word you used, or Shanahan infatuation of, let's go get all these power running pieces like Banks and these guards and these big downhill Sermon like backs. And why are you messing with what you do well?
Right. Exactly. Yeah. Look, the 49ers didn't have a first round pick to buoy the draft. So, and I said it was a C+, B-. So if you want to say C+, that's totally fine. But I think they got at least one starter. They got some depth and some reserves. But I could see the argument that it's worse than even a C+ in your mind. If you think Drake Jackson is rotational rusher and you think they didn't really get any true starters and everyone's just rotational depth. You want to try to get some starters in your draft. You want to think at least after the draft you got a couple and hopefully 3 starters in those first 3 rounds. That's usually the idea, but obviously they didn't have a first round pick, so I'll buy that. But I tried to judge these teams on what they started with in the draft process and not hold last year's draft against them this year.
My last nugget, and this wouldn't be huge, but of the 2 offensive linemen, I bet one of them becomes a useful piece. Of the 2 corners, I bet one of them becomes a useful piece. And, and not that they're going to Pro Bowl after Pro Bowl, those 4 guys I mentioned, but secondary and O-line help, I think, was, is helping a little bit.
I think we're seeing a lot more of that in drafts, is teams doubling up on positions of need and not trying to just hit it one time. We're seeing a lot of that.
Yeah, it seems like every time. I don't realize it until we actually sit down and do the draft. It's like the Seahawks took 2 tackles. They took 2 blah, 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 2 everything except for running backs. It's like Noah's Ark.
Yeah, exactly. Noah's Ark draft strategy.
Right.
All right. More of the chat coming up here. A couple Twitter questions as well. See some good questions coming up here about the Packers and about the Saints. But I want to let the folks out there know about rockauto.com, a family-owned business that has been helping do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. Rock Auto prices are always reliably low for every customer. If you're DIY or if you are a professional, rockauto.com has an amazing selection of parts for your car or truck at those reliably low prices. For example, if you are looking for, say, a fuel pump for a Honda Odyssey, why pay 30%, 50%, even 100% more for the same parts from a chain store or a car dealership that might only have one brand, and you don't really even know what they have on their screen they're looking at and quoting you some exorbitant price for it? That Honda Odyssey fuel pump might cost $350 from a chain store, but you go to rockauto.com and it's only $216. That's what you're getting at rockauto.com. You are getting the most competitive prices and the most absurd, and I'm talking seriously, they have every part for every car or truck you could imagine at rockauto.com. And when you go to rockauto.com, make sure you let them know that Locked On sent you. Write Locked On in there, how did you hear about us box, so they know we sent you to rockauto.com. Go there right now to see all the parts available for your car or truck. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need at rockauto.com. All right, we got a Pack fan here, Garrett. He says, do you expect the Packers will still grab a wide receiver in free agency, or will they roll with what they have right now? Let me run it down for you after the draft. This is what the depth chart is looking like for the Green Bay Packers. And by the way, you got a little bit of grief, Matt, that you said Randall Cobb was no longer on the Packers.
No, I know he is. I meant to
bringing it back.
Yeah.
And they have his little brother, Amari Rodgers. So
I know.
Randall Cobb gets hurt or something, they've got a similar player in Amari Rodgers, which, you know, at this point, a third rounder last year, you would expect he'd be ready to sort of take on that slot role. But when you lose Devontae Adams, you probably feel like you need that veteran in the room in Randall Cobb. So they got a couple of slot guys that are very similar covered.
They also took the Noah's Ark, approach here to the receiver position.
Yes.
I
mean, they have
three of them.
They have a lot of bodies. They have, by my count,
they have a lot of bodies. That's what I'm saying.
At least 12 wide receivers on the roster going into training camp. So they don't need bodies. If they need anything, if let's say if the wide receiver version of James Bradberry was cut at this point, I think maybe they would look at that.
Right.
But at this point, they drafted 2 wide receivers. Christian Watson, they traded up to get him in the second round. They're hoping he develops into that starter across from clearly Allen Lazard on the other side, and then Randall Cobb in the slot with Amari Rodgers, the young player. And then you've got Sammy Watkins, who's sort of a wild card. So if Christian Watson's not ready, you go Sammy Watkins early in the season and then maybe transition to Christian Watson. So I think they have probably enough depth when you consider Romeo Doubs, the 4th rounder as well, that'll be competing there. So when you look at maybe, most teams suit up around 6 wide receivers on game day. Christian Watson, Allen Lazard are probably the starters outside, or that's how they hope that it will go for the 49ers. Then you've got Watkins and Romeo Doubs backing them up with Juwan Winfrey in there, who was a college free agent, I think, a couple of years ago. You got Doubs, you got Rodgers, you got Randall. So you have 6 guys to suit up pretty easily, and then some other training camp fodder and some other guys battling for spots. The 7th rounder, Samori Toure, as well, that they drafted. So they drafted 3 wide receivers. So they went Noah's Ark plus.
Right. And I don't plus 1. Yeah.
And clearly, just by not going into the first round and trading up for a wide receiver, I think the Packers care less about the wide receiver position than pretty much everybody else on the planet, which is kind of funny.
Yeah, and one thing about their draft is after the run of receivers, they did take the next one in Watson. So I think it was just more about value than anything. Is where we're picking in the first round, it's just not worth a receiver pick here. It is a crowded room, and I think that's a big thing about their approach is just throw a bunch of things and something will stick at the fan eventually. Couple things, though. I mean, if by chance DK Metcalf, McLaurin, Debo, I don't think they would trade to Green Bay. But if they get to the contract impasse where that's just not going to work, I would be on the phone in a big way if I was Green Bay. I'll give you next year's first and whatever, and take Rodgers and one of our young guys as well. Clear out the room for DK or McLaurin or somebody like that. The likelihood of that happening is probably pretty slim. I bet they roll with what they have. Jarvis Landry, to me, is the name on the open market that's probably the best player, but I don't know that he's a great fit considering Cobb and Rodgers are there as well. BP, am I nuts? But I'm interested, and I've been on this carrot too many times. Sammy Watkins interests me in fantasy. Maybe only for the first month of the season before he gets hurt, but he can do good things still.
Oh, anybody who's going to be potentially highly targeted by a Hall of Fame quarterback would interest me, and he's going to be very cheap in your fantasy leagues.
He might lead their team in receptions. I mean, while healthy.
Yeah, a veteran wide receiver that has an entire offseason to work with Aaron Rodgers. I can see him coming out of the gate, and he's more explosive than
he's the most talented one on the group.
Yeah. So, and I wouldn't expect that to continue. So you draft him with your very last pick in your fantasy draft because he's not going to go early. And then he has a good couple of weeks, and then you trade him off before he gets hurt or gets overtaken by the rookie or something like that.
Exactly. Everyone's so excited. The Packers pulled one over on everybody. They revived Sammy's career, and And then
Matthew brings up Julio, which is an interesting name that's still out there. The fact that it doesn't count towards the comp equation, and the fact that he's still out there on the street, I'm sure teams are really worried about his injury history. And I didn't like his tape last year,
though.
Aaron Rodgers, but who knows how long that'll last, because that injury history is even worse than what we've seen with Sammy Watkins. But I would probably take Julio over Watkins for the Packers. But Julio wasn't available when they went and got Watkins.
Right. I guess. I mean, I feel like Julio is end of career, great receiver. Andre Johnson. So I mean, there's many names where their last couple of years weren't pretty. I was not very impressed with his tape last year. He basically never practices on Wednesday at this point. I don't think he has for some time. Rodgers to Julio 5 years ago would have been Montana to Rice. I mean, like the best combination you can get. I just think that ship might have sailed for Julio.
Looking at the depth chart, SportsFan79 asked about the Saints, the same question, basically about wide receivers. And after Michael Thomas, which we still don't know what that situation is, I haven't really heard anything about him. I've kind of forgot he existed. They traded up for Olave, but Traquan Smith is the number 3 there. Marquez Callaway. Beyond that, I mean, Aesop Winston, Gene Dixon, these are the names that are battling it out over there. So their depth is worse than the Packers, and they attacked the wide receiver position even harder in the draft as far as going up and getting the one guy, but depth is still an issue for the Saints. So I would say if I was a GM of either team, I'd be looking harder at wide receivers if I'm the Saints GM than even the Packers GM.
Oh, that's a good point. I mean, they're one injury away from being really, really light there yet again, and we saw what that looked like, and it wasn't pretty. I just talked salary cap, and I hadn't planned on doing salary cap, research, but they still have a lot of money. So a veteran there would certainly make some sense. They're aggressive. They're not going to be passive with what they do. Yeah, I could see them adding one more name there. I mean, somebody we've heard of.
A couple of good Twitter questions here to finish it up, and feel free, maybe we'll hit one more in the chat as well before we finish this live episode on Tuesdays, which is going to be a thing here on Peacock and Williamson. Might even do some more live shows as well, because I like the live shows. They're fun. It's fun to see the chat. It's fun to see the folks in there. Let's see. Josh says, the Jerry Rice of question askers, by the way. He says, I have pick 5 in a dynasty draft. I'm on the clock today and have until midnight to make the pick. The team is ready to win now. Do I take Garrett Wilson, Chris Olave, or Trayvon Burks?
See, I don't love that neighborhood. I assume he's not in the Superflex league. I don't love these early picks for dynasty, these wide receiver clump. And I'll just tell you how I have the receivers right now, and I change them every day. I go London, Wilson, Burks, Jamison Williams, Olave, Sky Moore, Dotson. But I don't know the difference between London and Dotson, which is, 7 players deep here, is all that much different to me. I'm in the middle of a dynasty draft right now, but mine's super flex. I had the 6th pick and I ended up with Burks, but I tried like crazy to trade out of it, to be honest with you. I mean, I'd much rather get another young receiver or a veteran or a future pick. Really, next year's draft is going to be pretty exciting, I think, too.
Multiple darts. If there's if there's someone a few picks behind you that wants to move up for their guy, move back. If you could get somehow the 3rd and let the rest of the league choose for you, and you end up with, say, Burks, and then get a Sky Moore out of it. I mean, that's what I'd be trying to do, is multiple throws at the dartboard, if that's possible. I don't know if it's possible before midnight to get a trade worked out. But if you have to take one of those 3 players,
Wilson for me.
I don't like Wilson's situation, but I would choose him over the others. But, there's going to be more competition early in his career. We don't know what his quarterback is going to end up looking like in Zach Wilson. Not related, by the way. So I would say Burks just because he's going to get hit with targets, and
that's what I settled on.
Yeah, you draft the big old dude, and you hope if you're trying to win now. But if you're not trying to win now, I would just go for Wilson, who's the best prospect of the three.
And maybe this is the time in your dynasty team's career, and rarely do I do this, but you trade that 5th pick in this rookie draft for, I'm thinking of insert 28-year-old wide receiver that you can start every week now guy,
Right.
to talking to a dynasty team that's trying to rebuild.
You're the Eagles.
Not Adam Thielen, but somebody 4 years younger than that.
You're the Eagles. You let somebody else be the Titans and trade up into this spot to get Burks, and you give them picks, and you go get A.J. Brown.
Yeah, exactly. Something along those lines. Give me an established guy who can start right now. Maybe it's Deontay Johnson or somebody like that. Somebody that's good,
Right. Here's the last one. Speaking of, and by the way, if it's a dynasty league, just draft the best player.
Oh, yeah, don't draft for need. I mean, those are tiebreakers, but there's so much trade, around. Just draft good players.
Corey Davis isn't going to be around that long, I don't think. That's the way I read it with the Jets. And, one injury, and all of a sudden Wilson's wide receiver 1, if he's not walking into camp as wide receiver 1 already.
I think Elijah Moore is really good.
I think he is too, but I think he's going to be a slot. And I think he's clearly a slot right now as their depth chart is. That's
how they perceive him.
And you shouldn't always expect any rookie wide receivers to be huge for you if you're in win now mode anyway. So if you're already in win now, that means your roster is good enough to win without this pick, I would assume.
Kick it down the road. If you're ready to win now, turn it into a future first and something else.
Last one here about those Jets. Is their rebuild overhyped? Andrew wants to know. The roster is still a 5 to 7 win roster, according to Andrew. Busted on Becton. Mims, quite possibly Wilson. Overpaid for mediocre players like Davis, Lawson, Tomlinson. Who are the hits so far? Michael Carter and Vera Tucker? Maybe more? So he's down. He's already calling Garrett Wilson a bust before he even straps it up for him. Or
I think he's talking about Zach on that one.
Okay, Zach Wilson. Okay. Yeah, Mims is not going to be much there for them. And they recently this week, I think it was Joe Douglas, was trying to hype him up, or maybe it was the wide receiver.
I heard that, yeah.
Yeah, and it's like, Mims, not really. Clearly he's not gotten any traction, and he's buried on the depth chart anyway. So yeah, Mims I think was a miss in the second round, and his short area quickness is just not good enough to separate from press coverage, even though he's got some ball skills and some deep speed. It just takes him too long to build up to that speed. So he's just going to be a contested catch guy, and unless his quarterback's ready to throw it to him, and he hasn't been able to get on the field to allow that quarterback to throw it to him. So yeah, but and Becton, yeah, there's been flashes. Injuries is probably the worst part for him. They did overpay for Tomlinson and Lawson and Davis, but they kind of had to get players to go to New York. I'm buying it. I think they're in a pretty good position to make a big move. But the question is, how good is their quarterback, and do they have the right coaching staff? Because if they have that right, their talent is better than some teams in their division, and they could start winning a lot of games.
Yeah, and I don't mind, quote, overpaying, and I'm not sure that Lawson's an overpay. He got hurt. He's a pass rusher. He's a good player. I like where they're allocating their resources, offensive line, pass rushers, wide receivers. To take it a step further, I think they've put themselves in good position, maybe not to win right this second, but to know if their quarterback is the guy or not. I mean, that's the answer you have to get. And now they have no reason to, no excuses, no, way of saying otherwise. Zach, we put more than enough around you to see what you can do. Can you do it or not? So, yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, that some of these moves aren't as home run-ish as we all make them out to be, including the draft, to be honest with you. Like, I get the hunch that Jermaine Johnson was not loved by the league quite as much as he was by draft Twitter. And remember, you had that great stat about his sacks are all late in the down. And I know the analytics folks don't love the Breece Hall pick, early second rounder on a running back. But I think from what was inherited here, 2 years ago, just a nightmare of a roster. It's now middle of the road.
Yeah. There's talent. There's talent in almost every position group now where it wasn't that way before. So the question is, do you have the right quarterback and the right coaching staff? Because if you do, they can go win a lot of games. And so I don't care about some of the rest of this. You're getting into the minutia a little bit too much of what's really important. Is Zach Wilson good? Did they develop him? Is it a good coaching staff? You're going to win some games.
I'm not suggesting they do this because it would impede Wilson's progress. But what if Baker Mayfield or Jimmy was the quarterback there? Is that a 9-win team?
If, health willing, you got some defensive linemen that can pressure the opposing quarterbacks. You got a shutdown guy now in Sauce on one side. You got plenty of wide receivers. You got guys that can make plays after the catch for your veteran quarterback. You know how someone like Jimmy Garoppolo operates in that offense. You know how that defense works, and Jimmy's gone to the Super Bowl with Robert Saleh calling plays on the other side. So, that's what I'm talking about. Like,
he can be able to run the ball.
You don't have to be amazing even if you're Zach Wilson. You just can't be a mess and make a whole bunch of mistakes.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you have to have a better feel for the speed of the game and your responsibilities, and there is ability there. I don't know. I don't mean to speak for you, but I don't think either one of us would have taken him at 2 last year. I liked him. I didn't love him at all.
It's such a weird class, and I have a feeling everyone's sleeping too hard on those quarterbacks because you saw how bad this quarterback class was, and the league clearly didn't like them. And even trying to artificially push those quarterbacks up, it wasn't happening this year. Those guys were so talented last year. And the biggest jump you see in NFL players is between year 1 and year 2. You have the full offseason program. You've seen the playbook. You've seen the speed of the game. You've gotten some of those rookie mistakes out of the way. And now you can become a pro into year 2. And every position, especially quarterback, it's the biggest leap. So I think we might see some really big jumps from some of these guys, and all of a sudden it's like, oh wow, whether it's and some of them are going to bust, I'm sure. So I don't know which ones is it going to be. Is it going to be we're talking about Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields is like, oh my God, these guys are superstars. How did nobody draft Justin Fields number 2 overall? Or are we going to see Fields and Trey Lance are busts, and it's like, oh yeah, Zach Wilson, he was the right pick because look at this ability, and he's going to start making those plays now that he's comfortable and stuff. Because you don't just walk in day 1 in the NFL and start making off-platform throws.
Right.
Stuff, and that's where
that's cherry on top. Yeah,
good. So yeah,
I think 2 of those. I'm just a guess, and I'm not even going to say the names. Although Lawrence is definitely still my favorite. I bet 2 of those guys drafted in the first round last year go from a $20 stock to an $80 stock.
Absolutely, and I think 2 of them pass up Mac Jones because Mac Jones got a little head start.
Yeah.
But he wasn't amazing either, and I think his ceiling is kind of capped unless he becomes like surgical Tom Brady-esque sort of a Drew Brees. Like, oh my God, this guy just goes accurately with the ball every single time, and that could be the case. Maybe he becomes that $80 stock, But I have a feeling a couple of those guys, just because of how physically talented they are, and we've seen it with some quarterbacks recently that, man, that talent just wins out. So who's going to take that Josh Allen like jump potentially?
Yeah, somebody might. And as for Mac, I know we'll wrap this thing up. I think he goes from a $50 stock to a $60 stock.
Right, just incremental. Yeah. Well coached. Right.
Sure.
But they lost some, not a lot of talent there, and they lost Josh McDaniels too. So
I would be shocked if he takes a step back, but I don't see a huge step forward.
Essentially, what I would do is I would buy as much stock as I could in those 2021 first round quarterbacks post hype, and I think you would make a big profit.
The 2021 quarterback mutual fund is
buy
now, right?
Exactly. Well put. All right. Thanks everybody for jumping in the live chat with us on YouTube. If you don't listen on YouTube, go check out Peacock and Williamson Daily on the Locked On NFL channel. Make sure you hit subscribe. And thanks for making Peacock and Williamson your first listen every day. For your second listen, there's a ton of shows to check out on the Locked On NFL Network, and Matt and I will be back tomorrow getting into the AFC draft grades with the AFC East. Talk to you then right here, Peacock and Williamson.